Hey guys, tonight we drift into a hall full of gold light and nervous laughter, the kind that hides 1,000 secrets under the scent of roasting meat. We're visiting a medieval royal wedding feast, a day when the world must sparkle, the bride must not trip, and the kitchens must somehow feed 500 guests with ingredients half of them can't pronounce. You, lucky listener, get a front row seat to the chaos. You probably won't survive this without catching a whiff of goose fat, smoke, or mild anxiety. But don't worry, I've got you covered. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the kind of cold that belongs to stone castles, air that smells faintly of iron, bread dough, and stress. The dawn sky outside is still gray-blue, the kind of color that doesn't yet commit to being morning. Inside, though, the corridors already hum. You hear boots slapping against the flagstones, the rattle of pewter dishes, and the occasional unholy shriek of someone discovering that the pheasants are still frozen. This is the Queen's wedding day. The kitchens have been awake since before midnight, fires blazing in great open hearths where spits of meat turn slowly. Whole oxen roast beside smaller armies of chickens. The cooks, half asleep, half furious, bicker over herbs, honey, and whether the bread should be braided or round. One of them mutters that he hasn't seen his wife in 3 days. Another dips his finger into a pot of almond milk and sighs with satisfaction. It's the closest thing to calm they'll get, until the last plate leaves the kitchen tonight. Outside, the courtyard smell of hay and horses. Grooms lead sleek destriers, polished for ceremony rather than war, to the stables. Their armor gleams, useless but impressive, as sunlight finally reaches the castle's tallest tower. Flags unfurl in the breeze, each bearing the symbols of alliances older than the Queen herself. You, standing there in borrowed boots, can't help noticing that everything looks like it's been designed to look effortless. Which, of course, means it's taken months of arguments, money, and more servants than anyone will admit. A boy no older than 12 scurries past carrying a basket of candied nuts. He drops one, looks terrified, and scoops it up again. No one will notice, he hopes. You make a mental note not to eat the candied nuts. The great hall, where the feast will later unfold, is still being decorated. Long trestle tables stretch almost the entire length, freshly scrubbed and covered in white linen. The linen isn't truly white, it's somewhere between parchment and we did our best. But when the candles are lit tonight, no one will care. The steward, a man with the permanent expression of someone whose soul left his body years ago, paces the floor muttering a list that seems to include both salt and sanity. A group of musicians tune their instruments near the dais. Lutes, shawms, and a small drum beat softly in time with the morning chaos. One of them sneezes. The sound echoes through the vaulted roof like a minor explosion. You wander toward the kitchens again because that's where the action is. Inside, the heat hits like a wall. Smoke curls up toward the ceiling, mingling with the smell of cinnamon, onion, and roasting flesh. Pots bubble. Someone yells for more water. A scullion slips on a puddle and earns a slap from the head cook, who is the undisputed monarch of this smoky kingdom. "Watch your step," she barks at you. "You there, don't breathe on the marchpane." You nod solemnly, as if marchpane almond paste molded into elaborate shapes were the crown jewels. It's hard to tell what's for show and what's for eating. There's a swan, recently roasted, being carefully redressed in its own feathers so it can glide out later as a live centerpiece. Someone else sprinkles gold leaf on a meat pie, because why not? The pie, apparently, represents prosperity, though one suspect's sneeze could turn prosperity into bankruptcy. Historians still argue whether royal feasts like this were genuine displays of abundance or calculated propaganda, a stage for power disguised as generosity. Whatever the truth, it's clear that every dish tells a story. The roasted peacock proclaims victory. The spiced wine whispers foreign trade. Even the humble bread loaf, stamped with the queen's emblem, reminds everyone who paid for their supper. You catch snippets of conversation among the servants. They gossip about the bride, how beautiful she looked at dawn, how pale, how much lace she wore. Someone claims her gown took 40 women and an entire week to assemble. Another swears the lace came from Venice, though no one in this kitchen has ever seen Venice. Out in the courtyard again, nobles begin to arrive. Their carriages creak through the gatehouse, wheels splattered with mud. Cloaks of velvet and ermine sweep the cobbles. The air fills with the scent of perfume, the expensive kind meant to hide the fact that medieval hygiene was optimistic. You watch as guests bow and preen, pretending not to judge one another's fabrics. One poor knight sneezes so violently that his plume detaches and floats off like a feathered ghost. Up in the tower, the chapel bell tolls once. That's the signal. The bride will begin dressing soon. The groom, meanwhile, is probably still pretending to look pious in the solar while someone gives him an inspirational talk about duty and heirs. You imagine him trying not to spill wine on his tunic before noon. A page runs by shouting for fresh rushes to be laid in the hall, the floor coverings of crushed herbs and reeds that serve as medieval air freshener. The scent of lavender and mint soon drifts through the air, mixing bizarrely with roasting boar. It's a combination that says luxury, but also damp castle. As the morning grows warmer, the energy changes. The chaos takes on rhythm. Servants stop panicking and start performing, every movement now practiced, every bow measured. You stand back, noticing how even the smallest task, like placing a goblet, carries ceremony. A trumpeter tests a note from the parapet, the sound sharp enough to make you flinch. It echoes down the valley, announcing to the nearby villages that today, someone important is getting married and that they're not invited. You lean on the stone balustrade, looking down at the scene. Banners, smoke, nervous faces. It's easy to forget that beneath all this splendor lies the grinding machinery of survival. This wedding isn't just romance, it's politics in a silk gown. The feast later tonight will feed the body of a kingdom that must believe in its own abundance. And yet in this moment it's all strangely beautiful. The sun catches the stained glass of the chapel, scattering color across the courtyard. The cooks shout. The musicians laugh. Even the steward, still counting spoons, allows himself a small, exhausted smile. You realize, standing there amid the noise and the scent of roasting feasts to be, that this is how history often begins, not with trumpets, but with someone yelling about undercooked venison. You're ushered into the queen's chamber by a harried maid who looks like she's been awake since the previous century. The room smells of rosewater, beeswax, and nerves. Candles gutter in iron sconces, even though daylight already floods through narrow windows, casting golden streaks across tapestries that depict heroes, saints, and some uncomfortably judgmental angels. In the center of it all stands the queen herself, or rather, what might one day become the queen. Right now, she's less a person and more a collective project. A circle of women swarm around her. Some brush her hair until it shines like liquid amber. Others tug ribbons, lace, and brocade into obedience. Somewhere in the back, a seamstress mutters a prayer over a particularly rebellious sleeve. You hover near the door, trying to look useful while avoiding the trajectory of flying pins. The bride's chief attendant, a stern woman with an expression sharp enough to slice parchment, shoves a jeweled girdle into your hands. "Hold this," she commands. You obey instantly. The object probably costs more than your village. The queen catches your eye in the mirror. She doesn't smile, queens rarely get to, but her look says everything. Is it supposed to take this long? It is. In fact, dressing a medieval queen could take hours. Each layer means something: status, piety, wealth, fertility, sometimes all four at once. Linen chemise, silk kirtle, stiffened bodice, jeweled belt, embroidered surcoat. Then the veil, the crown, the veil again because the first one wasn't perfectly symmetrical. Historians still argue whether royal brides were ever truly comfortable in their gowns or whether regal composure was just code for can't breathe. Someone produces a small vial of ambergris perfume, a luxury distilled from whale secretions. Yes, whale. You decide not to think too hard about that. The scent fills the air, rich and strangely sweet. You imagine the medieval equivalent of a product ad, now with 20% more ocean mystery. The queen lifts her arms obediently as jewels are fastened and laces drawn tight. "You'll glow like the Virgin herself," says one lady with unconvincing sincerity. Another corrects her. "No, brighter. She's the bride." You suspect the Virgin would disagree, but no one asks her opinion today. Through the open doorway, you can see the corridor filling with anticipation. Pages rush by with folded linens, priests whisper over incense burners, and a nervous falconer tries to keep a ceremonial hawk from mauling his gloves. The entire castle seems to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the queen will appear, glowing, silent, symbolic. Meanwhile, a small drama unfolds near the window. One of the younger maids is in tears because she accidentally dropped a pearl earring into a basket of rose petals. The chief attendant mutters a curse in Latin and sends 3 girls to dig through the petals until the missing gem is found. When they finally produce it, the relief in the room is so palpable that everyone bursts out laughing, even the queen. For a brief, human second, the future monarch just sounds like a girl giggling at an absurd moment in an overwhelming day. You help by holding a mirror while another attendant adjusts her crown. The circlet is delicate gold threaded with enamel and tiny sapphires that catch the morning light. It's not the heavy coronation crown, just a smaller symbol, enough to say this is no ordinary woman. You can feel the weight of it even without wearing it yourself. Then comes the veil. Long, sheer, edged with seed pearls, it falls around her like mist. Someone arranges it over her shoulders, another checks the drape. When she finally stands still, the entire room goes quiet. For a heartbeat, everyone forgets to fuss. You step back. The transformation is almost frightening. She's no longer the young woman surrounded by laughter and panic. She's become a painting come to life, an emblem of dynastic hopes and treaties disguised as beauty. The attendants drop into curtsies. The air hums. Outside, a trumpet sounds once, sharp and bright. That's the signal the bride is ready to be seen. But before she moves, there's one last superstition to observe. A silver coin is slipped into her shoe, for fortune, a sprig of rosemary, for remembrance, and under her gown, hidden near the hem, a scrap of parchment scrawled with a blessing written by the castle chaplain. Historians still debate whether such charms were tolerated by the church or quietly ignored. Faith and superstition tended to share the same bed back then. The queen murmurs something you can't quite hear, maybe a prayer or maybe just "let's get this over with." Her voice trembles slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of being watched by history. A pair of pages open the door. Cool air rushes in, carrying the faint scent of lavender rushes from the hall. The music in the distance grows louder, lutes, drums, and the echo of bells blending into a rhythm that feels ancient and inevitable. You follow at a respectful distance as she steps into the corridor. Nobles bow, servants press against the walls. The hem of her gown whispers across the floor like a wave retreating from shore. Sunlight glints off her jewels, scattering points of light that dance over stone. For a moment, you notice the quiet between sounds, that fragile silence when ceremony overtakes chaos. Even the cooks stop shouting in the kitchens below, as if the whole castle holds still for her passage. Someone murmurs, "May she bear strong sons." Another replies, "May she live long enough to." You glance at them, uncomfortable, but they only shrug. Blunt realism is the medieval form of optimism. As you trail behind the procession, you glimpse the walls lined with tapestries depicting weddings past. Each bride looks serene, each groom stern. You wonder how many of those couples actually met before the altar. Love here is often an afterthought to politics. The queen turns slightly, her eyes catching yours for half a second. There's a flicker of amusement, maybe gratitude, maybe she's just thinking that if one more person adjusts her sleeves, she'll start a small rebellion. You nearly trip over the edge of a rug. A nearby guard snorts softly, trying not to laugh. He whispers, "First day." You whisper back, "First century." He nods, understanding perfectly. As the procession nears the chapel doors, the air thickens with incense. The scent is cloying but strangely soothing. A priest waits by the entrance, flanked by acolytes carrying candles taller than you. Their wax drips onto the floor like slow golden tears. A final flurry of activity erupts, maids adjusting hems, nobles shuffling into place, the steward counting people again just to be sure no one important is missing. The queen takes a deep breath, straightens her back, and steps forward into the half-dark of the chapel. The heavy doors swing shut behind her, with a sound that feels both holy and final. You linger in the corridor, the echo of that sound still hanging in the air. Somewhere above, the bell tolls again, slower this time. The feast, the laughter, the spectacle, all that will come later. For now, the world waits on vows. And as you watch a stray ray of sunlight catch the dust motes swirling where she once stood, you realize that this morning, this flurry of pins, perfume, and whispered superstition will vanish into history, leaving only paintings and chronicles to remember her beauty. Still, you can't help smiling. For all its pomp and politics, the day began with laughter over a lost earring. Maybe that's what makes it real. You step out of the queen's chambers into a corridor alive with whispers, thin threads of gossip weaving through the air like invisible embroidery. The castle has turned into a hive. Courtiers hover in corners, adjusting their sleeves, checking for crumbs, pretending not to eavesdrop while absolutely eavesdropping. You move carefully, trying to look like you belong, which, in this place, mostly means walking slowly, carrying nothing, and wearing an expression of mild superiority. No one stops you. Everyone's too busy whispering. It's astonishing how fast news travels when there's no Twitter. By the time you reach the next stairwell, the gossip has mutated 3 times. The queen's gown is either enchanted, cursed, or stitched entirely from the hair of mermaids. Someone claims the groom fainted at breakfast. Another insists he's already drunk, and honestly, both could be true. You catch sight of a group of noblewomen clustered near a tapestry. They murmur like pigeons around a fountain. They say she's wearing Italian silk, one says. Venetian, corrects another, rolling the word around like it's an exotic pastry. My cousin swore it was French lace. A third insists, eyes gleaming with competitive delight. They fall silent when a priest passes by, then resume whispering the moment he's gone. You keep walking, half listening, half lost in the hum. There's something oddly soothing about it, as though the gossip itself is the castle's heartbeat. Down the next hall, a trio of knights argue quietly about dowry figures. 200 silver marks, says one, not counting the lands. Another shakes his head. 300 at least and a chest of emeralds. The third snorts. The emeralds are for show, everyone knows they're glass. Historians still argue whether such dowry rumors were deliberate tools of diplomacy or simply rich men showing off their math skills. Either way, the talk never stops. A royal marriage was less about love and more about mergers. Kingdoms stitched together like mismatched fabric, hopping the seams would hold. As you round the corner, you glimpse the groom's retinue assembled outside a small solar. They look restless, too polished, too still. The groom himself stands at the window, gazing out toward the courtyard below. He's tall, fine-boned, and clearly trying to project calm while his fingers tap nervously against the window frame. His brother whispers something that makes him laugh, the brittle kind of laugh that breaks before it finishes. A priest nearby recites a brief blessing, half to calm nerves and half because someone important demanded it. The groom nods solemnly, as if being knighted by invisible hands. You can almost hear the thought running behind his eyes. This is it. No backing out now. From the courtyard below, the sounds of preparation continue. Horses shuffle, banners snap in the wind, and someone drops a tray of pewter cups. The clatter echoes up like a warning bell. A page scurries to clean it up before the steward notices. The steward notices anyway. He always does. You pause at a narrow window overlooking the gardens. They've been trimmed into unnatural perfection for the day. Symmetrical hedges, marble fountains, ribbons of red and white roses twined into arches. It's all stunning and slightly exhausting. You wonder if anyone ever just sits here quietly when no feasts are planned. Maybe the gardeners do when the nobles aren't looking. A soft voice startles you. It's a fine day for a treaty. You turn, an elderly scribe stands behind you clutching a sheaf of parchment. His face is lined like a folded map. "That's what this is, you know," he says, tapping the papers. "Treaty first, wedding second. The poets will lie about that part later." You smile. "So the feast is politics." "Everything is politics," he sighs, "even the pies." You almost laugh, then realize he's not joking. Further down the hall, the castle chaplain hurries past carrying a reliquary, a small gilded box said to contain the bone of some obscure saint. He's muttering about blessings, omens, and whether the bride's astrological chart bodes well for fertility. Apparently, her birth hour coincided with Venus rising, which could mean great beauty or terrible luck. Historians still debate whether medieval astrologers actually influenced royal marriages or were just very expensive party entertainment. You continue toward the grand staircase, your steps muffled by woven rush mats. Servants with trays dart past, balancing wine, candles, or nervous energy. Someone shouts for more torches, someone else demands silence. The contradiction makes you grin. At the landing, two minstrels tune their instruments, plucking uncertain notes that hang in the air like questions. "Play something cheerful," says a passing courtier. The minstrel replies, "It's a wedding, cheerful is mandatory." Everywhere the air vibrates with expectation. It's like standing inside a held breath. You overhear snippets of political chatter, ambassadors confirming trade agreements, advisors muttering about border disputes that this marriage might or might not solve. "If she brings peace, she'll be a saint," one says. "If not, she'll be a scapegoat." The line lands like prophecy. Someone opens a door near you, and a wave of noise rushes out, clattering pots, servants laughing, a goose honking indignantly. Inside, you glimpse the makeshift antechamber where the feast supplies are being staged. Barrels of wine stack like miniature towers, baskets of bread, dried fruits, and pies line the walls. In one corner, a cook scolds an assistant for burning the illusion dish, a pastry shaped like a castle that was supposed to spout smoke. "Now it just collapses," she groans. "Symbolic, that." The humor is too good to ignore. "Maybe it's a metaphor," you offer. She glares. You take your cue to leave. Returning to the main corridor, you spot a cluster of servants kneeling to polish the floor tiles one last time. They gossip too, but theirs is different, more practical, less cruel. "Did you hear?" one says. "The queen gave the kitchen boy her leftover honey cakes." "Aye," replies another, scrubbing hard. "She's kind, that one. Not all queens are." That detail warms you unexpectedly. You picture her again, the girl in the mirror, hidden under silk and symbolism, and wonder if that kindness will survive the crown. As you move on, a sudden draft rolls through the corridor. A candle flickers out, smoke curling upward like a sigh. It's such a small moment, but it feels significant, a quiet reminder that everything here, from alliances to candlelight, is fragile. You find yourself outside the chapel doors again, listening to the low hum within. The ceremony hasn't started yet, but the priests are rehearsing. You can hear their murmurs, the soft rustle of robes. It's like the calm before a storm, the sacred kind. A group of courtiers gathers nearby, still whispering. "Do you think she's nervous?" one asks. "If she isn't, she should be," another replies. "You can't marry a man you barely know without nerves." A third sighs dramatically. "I can't even dine with mine without nerves." You chuckle quietly. It's these little human cracks in the facade that make the grandeur bearable. Behind the veils and vows, people are still people, gossipy, anxious, hopeful, ridiculous. A bell rings once more, louder this time. The sound shivers through the corridor, scattering whispers like birds. The time has come. Doors swing open, light spills out, and you step aside as the first part of the procession begins to form. Somewhere deep inside the castle, the kitchens cheer, the hardest work is done. In the hall, the steward exhales. The musicians raise their bows. You can almost feel history leaning forward, waiting to see if everything will go right, or at least, wrong in a beautiful way. And as the first notes of music drift through the air, you realize that every whisper, rumor, and anxious prayer has been leading to this moment. The slow heartbeat before the feast begins in earnest. The bells ring again, this time in rhythm, a slow and stately peal that fills the corridors, the courtyards, and even the rafters where doves roost, startled into flutter. The sound rolls like soft thunder across the castle grounds, signaling to every servant, guest, and musician that the moment has truly arrived. You follow the movement toward the chapel doors. Torches flicker in iron brackets, their light catching on polished armor, silk veils, and the pale gold of prayer books. The smell of beeswax, lilies, and incense thickens the air. At the great doors, two heralds stand ready, tall men in crimson tabards embroidered with the royal crest, trumpets poised. Behind them, the queen's procession begins to gather. You see her now, emerging from her chamber. The hush that falls is almost reverent. She moves like someone walking through water, slow, deliberate, every motion rippling outward. The gown, a cascade of pearl-white silk, glows in the candlelight as though lit from within. A train of cloth of gold trails behind her, carried by two young maids who look simultaneously proud and terrified. Her veil is so fine it seems spun from mist, pinned by a crown of filigreed silver. Beneath it, her face is unreadable, serene, perhaps, or resigned. She walks between two bishops, her hands folded, her eyes fixed ahead. The murmurs around you rise and fall like waves. She's beautiful, too pale, just the right amount of pale. Her hair's the wrong shade for the season. The endless, inevitable commentary of the court. Even now, beauty is an argument. As she passes, you catch a faint scent, rosewater and myrrh. The same fragrance that was used in her bath this morning, rumored to make the skin glow under candlelight. Every gesture, every perfume, every jewel has been calculated to project one thing: divine grace. A queen must seem half mortal, half myth. The heralds raise their trumpets. A clear, bright note slices through the murmurs. The doors open wide, revealing the chapel, a vision of gold, shadow, and colored glass. Candles shimmer against the stone. Stained glass saints watch from the walls, their jewel-toned eyes eternal and expressionless. The groom waits at the altar, flanked by his knights and advisors. His posture is perfect, though his jaw tightens when she approaches. The crowd stirs. A monk begins to chant the opening prayer in Latin, the syllables rolling like waves over polished marble. The language is old, the tone reverent. No one here truly understands every word, but everyone pretends they do. As the bride steps forward, the sunlight, thin and late, streams through the rose window, setting her veil aflame with color. For a moment, it looks as though she's walking through light itself. You stand at the back, half lost in the chorus, watching the ritual unfold. It's strange how something so personal can also be so public. The vows are spoken not just for each other, but for the room, for the court, for the realm. The priest speaks. In faith and troth ye plight each to other. The words drift up to the rafters, where the doves have settled again, cooing faintly. She lifts her veil just slightly, enough for him to see her face clearly for the first time today. He looks startled, then smiles. It's small, genuine, fleeting, a rare moment of humanity amid all the ceremony. The ring is placed, the kiss given brief, ceremonial, polite. The crowd exhales as though they've been holding their breath for the entire vow. A few ladies dab discreetly at their eyes. Others mentally assess whether their own daughters might one day make a similar match. The priest blesses them with holy water. A few droplets fall onto her gown and vanish instantly, absorbed into the silk. It feels symbolic, somehow, the divine soaked up by the fabric of politics. Then the trumpets sound again, triumphant. The bells outside erupt in joy, echoing across the hills. The couple turns, arm in arm, and walks back down the aisle. As they pass, courtiers bow, and petals are scattered from gilded baskets, dried rose petals, lavender, and tiny sprigs of rosemary for remembrance. The scent fills the air like memory itself. Once they reach the doors, a sudden gust of wind catches her veil, sending it fluttering like a ghost. She laughs softly, the first unguarded sound she's made all day, and the court seems to pause in astonishment, as if reminded she's human after all. Outside, the courtyard bursts into life. Trumpets blare, banners wave, and servants cheer from balconies. The couple mounts a pair of white horses draped in embroidered cloth. They ride slowly through the gate toward the great hall, where the feast awaits. The air hums with excitement. Musicians strike up a lively tune. Children chase after the procession. The scent of roasted meat wafts from the kitchens like a promise. You follow the tide of guests toward the hall, a vast chamber lined with torches and banners. The tables stretch endlessly, already set with silver goblets, trenchers of bread, and bowls of early fruit. At the high table, 2 golden chairs await, flanked by bishops and ambassadors. A herald announces the royal couple's arrival. Everyone rises. The groom leads her to her seat, and as she sits, the hall erupts in applause. The feast begins. Servants pour wine, red as rubies, into goblets. Trays of roasted swan, pheasant, and venison parade past. There are pies shaped like doves, spiced almonds, candied oranges, and towers of marzipan castles. Everything gleams under the candlelight, extravagant, excessive, and utterly mesmerizing. At the center, the newlyweds exchange quiet words, almost lost beneath the din. You can't hear them, but you can tell it's something kind. He looks at her as if trying to memorize her face. She smiles, small and polite, but her eyes soften. It's not love, not yet, but it's something. Around them, the court performs its own dance. Laughter, gossip, subtle rivalries disguised as toasts. A minstrel begins a song about a knight who fell in love with a queen. Everyone laughs knowingly. Hours pass in a blur of sound and gold. Cups are refilled, plates replaced, candles burn low. By the time the 5th course is served, a shimmering jelly molded into the shape of a swan, the air feels heavy with warmth and wine. You notice how beauty itself seems to fade as the night deepens, powder smudges, jewels slip, flowers wilt. And yet somehow everyone looks softer for it, more human, even the queen. A hush falls as she rises to make a toast. Her voice is clear, melodic, touched with formality. She thanks the guests, blesses the realm, and raises her cup to peace, her father's word, her husband's hope, and perhaps, secretly, her own wish. The hall roars with approval. Somewhere beyond the walls, the bells begin again, slower now, distant, echoing through the dark countryside like the afterthought of a dream. The feast continues, but you step outside into the cool night air. The courtyard is nearly empty now, littered with petals and faint torchlight. Above, the moon hangs pale and watchful. You breathe in, the air smells of rain, roses, and smoke. The music drifts faintly from within, softening into a lullaby. And for a moment you think, this is how history truly lives, not in battles or treaties, but in candlelight, silk, and the small, uncertain smile of a queen who just became a story. The sound that greets you as you re-enter the hall is thunderous, not the stormy kind, but the kind born of 100 goblets striking wood in a single rhythm. It echoes up into the rafters, ricocheting between banners. The newly crowned couple has returned from the chapel, And with them comes the real reason everyone showed up tonight: the celebration. Trumpets flare again, sharp and bright, as the heralds shout the traditional proclamation, something about divine favor, long lineage, and future heirs. You can't quite hear every word over the cheers, but the message is clear enough. The realm expects children, alliances, and at least the illusion of marital bliss. The queen, still glowing faintly from candlelight and adrenaline, walks hand in hand with her husband to the dais. Her smile has become a diplomatic instrument, perfectly measured and serene. She glances across the room: nobles, clergy, visiting merchants, and more than a few opportunists in borrowed finery. It's a living chessboard of power. You half expect the bishops to start moving diagonally. The hall itself feels alive. Tapestries ripple in the heat. Candles drip wax like melted honey. A faint draft sneaks through the cracks in the stone, carrying the scent of roasting meat from the kitchens below. Servants scurry like silent ghosts, refilling jugs of wine and ale. At the center of it all stands the high table, a marvel of carved oak and embroidered linens, flanked by gilt candelabra so heavy they could double as siege weapons. You're guided toward your own seat somewhere among the lesser nobility, close enough to see but not to speak. The hum of conversation swells like surf against the shore. And then the first toast begins. The king's steward, a man with a voice built for theater and an ego to match, rises and lifts his cup. He calls for health, fortune, and a fruitful union. The hall roars its approval, cups raised high. Some drink deeply, others only pretend it's still early, and packing is essential if you don't want to wake up tomorrow in the stables. You notice the queen take a polite sip, her eyes steady, never losing composure. Even in joy, she must perform control. Beauty, grace, restraint, the eternal trifecta of royal womanhood. A fact floats into your mind. In medieval courts, the ability to remain composed while eating or drinking was considered proof of breeding. A noblewoman was judged not just by lineage, but by how elegantly she chewed. Forks wouldn't appear widely for another century, so the entire display depended on good fingers and better timing. Across the room, a minor noble laughs too loudly, sloshing wine onto his sleeve. A servant appears instantly with a cloth, as if summoned by embarrassment. The noble waves him off and loudly declares his admiration for the queen's radiant beauty and heavenly modesty. The crowd laughs. She inclines her head, neither blushing nor frowning. It's the perfect non-reaction. You lean back and let the scene wash over you: laughter, lute music, the metallic clink of serving platters. At the far end, pages carry in enormous trays bearing the first course: roasted quail glazed with honey, surrounded by apples and sprigs of rosemary. The smell alone could convert a monk. The steward toasts again, this time to the union of kingdoms. The hall murmurs approval. Somewhere behind you a courtier whispers, "Let's hope the dowry as generous as the banquet." You stifle a smile. Medieval diplomacy often came garnished with sarcasm. You look back toward the royal pair. The groom leans in to whisper something. The queen's mouth curves into a faint, real smile. It's the first sign she's truly present beneath all the formality. Maybe she said something funny back, or maybe she's just pretending, the way queens often must. A group of minstrels in blue and green tunics strikes up a melody, gentle, lilting, and just off-key enough to feel authentic. The tune carries stories of brave knights and impossible romances, of battles that never happened and virtues no one could possibly live up to. The guests hum along, content to be part of the performance. A quirky historical tidbit crosses your mind. Some medieval banquets hired jesters of silence, whose job wasn't to joke, but to stand motionless and stare at guests until they felt uncomfortable enough to behave. You glance around. The servants lining the walls could easily fill that role. As the courses continue, so do the toasts. The bishop rises next, blessing the couple and sprinkling holy water across the table. A few droplets land in someone's wine, and you wonder whether that counts as a divine chaser. He intones blessings for fertility, prosperity, and divine harmony, all while looking mildly offended that no one is fasting tonight. Historians still argue whether such wedding blessings were genuinely sacred or merely performative. Was the union about love, or property, or politics wrapped in gold ribbon? You can almost hear the centuries of debate echoing in the background, as if the walls themselves are whispering their opinions. Then come the musicians. A set of trumpeters enters, followed by a choir of boys whose high voices rise in angelic counterpoint. The melody is haunting, beautiful, and at least 10 minutes too long. Half the guests have glazed expressions, their minds drifting toward the roasted pheasant still waiting in the wings. You can't blame them. Feasts like this could last for hours, sometimes days. Contemporary chronicles describe tables collapsing under the weight of courses. One medieval banquet in Burgundy reportedly included over 100 dishes per guest. You'd need a squire just to carry the leftovers. The trumpets finally fade. A moment of silence follows, punctuated by a sneeze somewhere near the back, delicate, ladylike, immediately blessed by 3 different priests. The queen hides a smile behind her cup. The next course arrives in procession: roasted boar with gilded tusks, served with spiced wine. The beast's mouth holds an apple, its eyes painted with tiny dots of gold leaf. It's grotesque and magnificent. Guests cheer, servants carve. Steam rises like holy incense. Someone begins a new toast, this one less formal, more heartfelt. A young knight, clearly emboldened by drink, stands and speaks of loyalty and courage. His speech is half rehearsal, half confession. He ends by wishing that every man might find his queen, though perhaps not his dowry. Laughter ripples through the hall. The groom raises his cup in acknowledgement. The queen nods graciously, and the knight sits down looking relieved that he wasn't executed for wit. The air grows warmer, louder. Candles bend under heat. A faint haze of smoke and perfume hovers above the crowd. You notice one of the ladies-in-waiting fanning herself furiously while still pretending to look dignified. At your table, a debate sparks over the symbolic meaning of swans. One guest insists they represent purity, another claims they're an omen of betrayal. It depends, someone says, on whether the swan's still breathing when it's served. You nearly choke on your wine. Somewhere near the dais, a small mishap unfolds. A servant trips, sending a plate of sugared almonds scattering like hail across the floor. The hall gasps. The queen's reaction is immediate and calm. She bends slightly, waves a hand, and murmurs something to the boy. He straightens, trembling but smiling. The tension dissolves. Grace under pressure, that's the real mark of royalty. The king laughs, a deep, rolling sound that fills the room. It breaks the stiffness of ceremony. Someone starts clapping, others join in. Soon, the hall is laughing with him, toasting again. The boy is given another tray and a seat near the fire, a gesture that will be recounted for months as proof of the queen's kindness. And just like that, the mood shifts. The feast becomes looser, the laughter easier, the stories louder. Someone starts a drinking song. Someone else claims to have seen the royal astrologer fall asleep in his soup. You lean back and watch the candlelight blur. The queen looks radiant now, not because of jewels or powders, but because she's laughing, not loudly, but genuinely. The groom looks at her, and for a fleeting instant, you think he might be falling in love. The herald steps forward one final time to announce the next course, a grand spectacle involving a pie that will, supposedly, release live doves when cut. You sigh softly. You probably won't survive this feast. The next act of the feast doesn't arrive, it enters, like an army. You feel it before you see it. The heavy footfalls of servants carrying immense trays, the sharp scent of cinnamon and roasted meat, and the rising tide of chatter as every guest cranes forward. The herald's voice booms above the noise. Behold the course of magnificence, which, you suspect, is code for please applaud the kitchen staff before they collapse. From the side doors, the parade begins. Each servant moves in carefully rehearsed formation, balancing platters that steam and shimmer under candlelight. The hall becomes a corridor of scent, saffron, honey, spiced wine, roasted nuts, and that mysterious, slightly alarming undertone of cooked peacock. Yes, peacock. You blink. There it is, feathers, beak, the whole bird standing proudly atop its own roasted body, arranged to appear as if it might rise and fly away from its culinary fate. The skin gleams with glaze and gold leaf. People cheer. You, meanwhile, silently question every life choice that led you to this moment. But to the medieval mind, such dishes weren't grotesque. They were art, performance, and propaganda all at once. A peacock was a symbol of immortality and divine beauty, perfect for a royal wedding where the guests were meant to see their monarchs as semi-celestial beings. Historians still argue whether the birds were actually eaten or merely displayed, since accounts describe both possibilities with equal enthusiasm. Either way, the spectacle works. Even the queen looks impressed, or at least politely so. The king leans toward her and whispers something that makes her smile again, perhaps a joke about whether the bird was cooked by divine intervention. Behind the peacock, more wonders appear: whole boars, their tusks gilded, trout arranged in spirals, pies as tall as small children. The centerpiece, however, earns its own fanfare, a massive pastry dome painted with stars and banners. The steward steps forward dramatically, brandishing a carving knife. A marvel of the realm's bounty, he declares, slicing deep into the crust. And then chaos. With a flurry of feathers, doves erupt from the opening, wings beating wildly as they scatter into the rafters. Guests gasp and applaud as the birds circle the hall. A few land on chandeliers. One particularly brave dove lands on the bishop's mitre, earning a nervous laugh from the priest and an even louder one from everyone else. The crowd is delighted. The queen laughs too, a real clear sound that rings through the chamber. For a brief moment, everyone sees her not as a symbol but as a person, young, alive, amused by the absurdity of it all. And then just as swiftly the formality returns. Servants sweep in to clear the feathers, the music strikes up, and the feast continues. You're handed a trencher of bread, thick, coarse, meant to soak up everything from gravy to spilled ale. Medieval banquets used these edible plates, which would later be given to the poor or to the hounds once the nobles were done. You can't help but think that the dogs probably ate better than half the village tonight. A fresh jug of wine appears before you. You pour carefully, already aware of how treacherously strong medieval wines were: sweet, heavy, sometimes spiced, and occasionally thick enough to double as furniture polish. You sip anyway. It's delicious. Around you, the murmur of conversation grows. The hall feels warmer, louder, a living creature fed by laughter and food. People are beginning to loosen, their stiff courtesy dissolving into chatter. At the high table, the king's advisors argue good-naturedly about whether France will ever honor its trade promises. The queen listens politely, but her attention drifts toward a cluster of musicians tuning their instruments nearby. Soon the minstrels strike up another tune, something lighter now, quick and lilting. Flutes, lutes, a drum softly tapping in time. The melody weaves through the air like ribbon. It's a song of harvest and hope, sung in the old tongue, the kind of tune peasants hum while stacking hay. You can tell because a few of the older guests mouth the words automatically. And here's a curious fact. Many of these courtly songs began as common folk tunes before being adopted and sanitized for noble ears. The melodies survived, but the lyrics changed from "my boots are full of mud" to "my heart is full of love." History, it seems, is just one long act of refinement. A man beside you, red-faced and grinning, begins to clap along to the beat. Within seconds, others join him. The sound rolls across the hall, rhythmic and thunderous, as cups slam in unison. The minstrels grin and play faster. The feast has transformed into a celebration proper. A group of dancers takes the open space before the dais, 4 women, 4 men, all dressed in bright silk. They move in intricate patterns, each step precise, every bow deliberate. The dance is called the carol, a popular courtly performance where movement mimics harmony. It's elegant, slow, and somehow hypnotic. The queen watches, hands folded, expression soft. Perhaps she's imagining her own role in this choreography of power, the careful turns, the required gestures, the balance between grace and obedience. You catch yourself thinking, it must be exhausting to be perfection on display. But there's another layer beneath this grace: politics. Each dancer represents a household, and every movement is a statement of loyalty. Even the order in which they turn toward the high table carries meaning. Medieval people read gestures like modern audiences read headlines. Historians still argue whether these performances were rehearsed for weeks or improvised, but either way, they were meant to be remembered. Art as diplomacy. When the dance ends, applause fills the room. The dancers bow, the musicians stop. For a heartbeat, there's silence. Then, a sudden burst of laughter as a small dog, possibly the same one that stole bread earlier, darts across the floor, chasing a loose feather. The crowd cheers it on. Someone jokes that the dog should be knighted. The mood is golden now, softened by food and drink. Even the guards along the walls have relaxed slightly, though they still pretend not to. The servants sweep in again with fresh platters, stewed pears, cheese glazed in honey, pastries dusted with sugar so fine it sparkles. Dessert in medieval fashion means sweetness and symbolism. Everything here has meaning: pears for fertility, almonds for endurance, sugar for wealth. Every bite is a message disguised as indulgence. A scholarly tidbit: sugar at this time was more valuable than gold by weight. To serve it in such abundance was the culinary equivalent of wearing a crown on your tongue. The queen takes a sugared violet from a crystal bowl and places it delicately on her plate. Around her, nobles murmur their approval, another small act of symbolism. Violet means faithfulness. You wonder whether she chose it on purpose or simply liked the color. The hall hums with contentment. The doves have settled in the rafters again, cooing softly as if joining in the lull of post-feast peace. The music gentles to a single harp. Somewhere behind you, someone begins a story, a long, winding tale about a knight who challenged a dragon to win his bride, only to discover that the bride preferred the dragon's company. The laughter spreads like candlelight, warm and human. You lean back, letting your eyes drift toward the ceiling where the smoke curls in ribbons. The feast has lasted hours, and yet no one seems ready to stop. The night feels endless, caught between indulgence and dream. The queen rises once more. The room hushes instantly. She raises her goblet, her voice calm but strong. "To those who built this day with hands, hearts, and hope," she says, "to our people and to peace." Simple words, but perfectly chosen. The applause is thunderous. Somewhere in the rafters, the doves take flight again, circling once more before disappearing into the shadows. And as you watch, you realize that this blend of spectacle and sincerity is the true heart of the feast. A performance, yes, but one that binds the realm together, even if only for a night. You've barely swallowed your last sugared pear when the steward claps twice loudly, and the sound rolls across the hall like thunder. The chatter dies instantly. Servants halt mid-step, minstrels freeze with strings in hand, and even the dogs under the benches look up, alert. Something is about to happen. A new phase of the feast is beginning, the one where etiquette and endurance meet in mortal combat. This is the stage of manners, or, more precisely, of not making a complete fool of yourself while covered in honey glaze. You settle back, clutching your goblet like a shield. The steward clears his throat. "My lords, my ladies, the tables of His Majesty and Her Grace shall now be served with the grand game." The grand game, as it turns out, isn't a form of jousting. It's dinner theater disguised as table manners. Every guest must participate, displaying their refinement while eating things no human hand should reasonably touch. You watch a line of servants bring in bowls of broth, steaming, fragrant but suspiciously hot. Nobles lean forward, each trying to sip without splashing, burning, or making the faintest slurp. You try not to smirk. There's a reason medieval courts had entire manuals on how not to look like a barbarian while ingesting liquid fire. Forks, of course, don't exist yet. A fact you can feel very keenly when the next dish, roasted quail, appears before you. You tear the meat delicately with your fingers, praying no one's watching. Unfortunately, everyone is. Here's a historical fact for you. By the late Middle Ages, aristocrats often carried personal knives as both tools and status symbols. A knight's dagger was as much about slicing meat as it was about slicing through awkward silences. But even then, using too much knife was considered coarse. Eating was supposed to look effortless. Remember, a lady nearby whispers to her companion, never lick your fingers. Dab, always dab. You watch her demonstrate. She wipes her fingertips with a linen square, her face the picture of sanctified restraint. It's impressive, considering her sleeve just caught fire from a nearby candle. A servant swoops in to extinguish it, bowing deeply as if saving nobles from spontaneous combustion is part of his daily routine. The queen, meanwhile, manages everything flawlessly. She handles each dish with calm precision, even as the courses become increasingly treacherous. Jellies that collapse without warning, soups served in bread bowls that leak mysteriously, and pastries stuffed with spices so hot they could wake the dead. You can't help but admire her focus. A queen's every gesture is a performance. Even how she chews carries meaning. Somewhere deep down, you suspect she'd trade half her dowry for a spoon. Historians still argue whether these elaborate banquets were meant for enjoyment or intimidation. Were they displays of abundance, or subtle reminders of who controlled the granaries? The guests probably didn't care. They were too busy trying not to drip gravy onto their sleeves. As the feast continues, etiquette starts to crumble. Someone laughs too loudly, someone else sneezes directly onto the table, and then attempts to blame it on divine will. The servants move swiftly, replacing plates and mopping up small disasters. You're beginning to see the real brilliance of medieval banquets. They're not about perfection. They're about surviving spectacle with dignity intact. The minstrels change tune again, a sprightly melody with clapping woven into the rhythm. Guests begin to tap their fingers on the table in time. The steward scowls but can't stop them. The wine has loosened everyone's sense of decorum. A minor noble down the table decides to demonstrate his juggling skills with pears. 3 tosses in, he drops one and it rolls perfectly beneath the high table. The queen glances down, bemused. The king bursts out laughing. The hall follows suit. You breathe easier. Even royalty appreciates a bit of chaos. The servants begin clearing away trenchers, those thick slabs of bread now soaked with juices, sauces, and dignity. They'll be carted off to the kitchens, where they'll either feed the poor or the pigs, depending on whose moral compass you ask. And now, the intermission, that brief lull when guests stretch, gossip, and pretend they haven't eaten their weight in meat. You take the chance to look around the room. Every surface gleams. Wax drips down silver candlesticks. Banners droop slightly in the humid warmth. The air smells of rosemary, oranges, and roasted fat. Someone spilled wine near you, and the scent of it mingles with smoke from the torches, creating something strangely nostalgic, like autumn and headache combined. You catch snippets of conversation, alliances being quietly negotiated, rumors about neighboring dukes, and one lady complaining that the doves in the rafters look judgmental. You smile, they do. A servant refills your goblet and murmurs, "The queen's course is next." His tone carries both reverence and warning. The queen's course, traditionally a symbolic dish prepared in her honor, representing her virtues and the hopes for her marriage. You've heard legends. Swans baked in pastry armor, fish molded into crowns, even entire towers made of sugar. Tonight's version arrives under a silk-draped canopy, carried by 4 trembling servants and followed by a herald whose voice is cracking under the weight of ceremony. The fabric lifts. Gasps ripple through the hall. It's a sculpture, edible, allegedly of the royal couple seated side by side, crafted entirely from marzipan and gilded sugar. The details are astonishing. Her jeweled crown, his brocade sleeves, even a tiny golden dove perched on her shoulder. For a second the guests are silent, then applause erupts. The king rises, laughing. "I'd say she looks too perfect to eat," he says, raising his cup. "But I've learned never to argue with sugar." The hall roars with laughter. Even the queen joins in, though she blushes slightly. The steward cuts a small piece from the marzipan replica, the ceremonial sharing of sweetness. A fragment is offered to her, then to him, then passed along to a few chosen nobles. The symbolism is clear enough. Harmony, unity, and the hope that married life will taste as pleasant as this. You try a sliver, it's fine, mostly almonds and ambition. Still, the gesture matters more than the flavor. In this world, food is language. To feed is to bless. To share is to bind. Every crumb carries a whisper of diplomacy. The queen dabs her lips with a napkin, the universal signal that the ritual has ended. The musicians strike a soft chord, marking the shift into the evening's lighter mood. Desserts continue. Sugared plums, candied rose petals, little pastries shaped like hearts. You try not to calculate how much all this sugar cost in human labor, every granule probably mined from the sweat of faraway workers. The thought lingers like the aftertaste of spice. And then, inevitably, the clumsy part begins. A noblewoman in too tight brocade attempts to rise, misjudges her balance, and knocks an entire jug of wine into her husband's lap. He jumps up, sputtering, while the table bursts into laughter. "A blessing of abundance," someone shouts. You're fairly certain that's not what abundance feels like. The queen covers her smile behind her goblet, trying not to laugh openly. You can almost hear her inner voice saying, "Thank the saints it wasn't me." The steward, whose job tonight has clearly become wrangle chaos with dignity, steps forward to propose the next round of entertainments. Jugglers, storytellers, and yes, jesters. The crowd cheers. For now, though, the guests sink back into post-feast calm. Plates are cleared. The hall glows dimmer as candles burn low, and conversation softens to a murmur. You glance toward the queen. She's leaning slightly toward the king, speaking quietly, a calm smile ghosting her lips. Whatever she says makes him laugh again, genuinely this time. The sound fills the hall like warmth. And you think, beneath all the ceremony, the manners, and the endless performance, perhaps there really is a spark here. The steward's booming voice fades beneath the swelling notes of a harp. Candles have been replaced, the scent of beeswax softening the air, and the great hall takes on a golden warmth that feels less ceremonial and more human. The feast may be over, but the night is far from done. This is when the real theater begins, the entertainment, carefully choreographed chaos wrapped in etiquette. You shift on the long bench as a group of musicians file in, their lutes and recorders glinting like polished honey in the firelight. They exchange conspiratorial smiles. You can tell they've been waiting all evening for this. Banquets may feed the stomach, but music feeds whatever remains awake after 3 hours of digesting history. The queen leans forward slightly, her expression softened by candlelight. It's the first time all night she looks less like an icon and more like a person. You notice her fingers tracing slow circles along her goblet's rim, perhaps nerves, perhaps relief. The king sits beside her, trying not to yawn in a way that will be recorded by the chronicler 2 tables away. The first song begins, a slow, mournful ballad about 2 lovers separated by war, performed by a troubadour with hair that's definitely seen better centuries. His voice wavers but holds steady enough to carry the hall into a collective sigh. You imagine this was once the medieval equivalent of a chart-topper, simple melody, tragic ending, zero royalties. Here's your historical fact for the section. Medieval entertainers weren't just for amusement. They were often political instruments. A song could reinforce loyalty, ridicule enemies, or gently remind everyone of divine order. The clever ones knew exactly how far they could push the line without losing their tongues. Halfway through the second verse, though, the troubadour's lyric takes a wrong turn. Instead of comparing the heroine's eyes to stars, he compares them to turnips. The silence that follows is painful. A servant coughs. Somewhere, a lute twangs in sympathy. Then the king laughs, loudly. It breaks the tension instantly. The queen chuckles, shaking her head. The troubadour blushes crimson, mutters something about creative metaphor, and the hall erupts into applause. You can almost feel the relief roll through the room. It's as if everyone has silently agreed that tonight is for joy, not judgment. Next come the jugglers, two young men in motley colors, their bells jingling as they bow so deeply their hats nearly touch the floor. They start small, tossing apples, then knives, then, to the crowd's delighted horror, flaming torches. The flickering light dances across the walls, painting the tapestries with living fire. One torch drops, but miraculously it lands in a gravy bowl, sputtering out with a hiss. The juggler bows again as though it was planned, holding his dripping torch aloft like a trophy. The audience cheers. You suspect half of them are just thrilled the castle didn't catch fire. Historians still argue whether medieval jesters were comic geniuses or social pressure valves. Some accounts say they wielded shocking freedom of speech, permitted to mock nobles, tease kings, and say what no one else dared. Others think they were simply scapegoats, convenient targets for laughter in a world that took itself far too seriously. The jester tonight, though, is clearly of the clever kind. He somersaults into view, bells tinkling, grin wide enough to rival the chandeliers. He addresses the queen first, bowing dramatically. "My lady," he says, "you shine brighter than the candle wax upon every scholar's forehead in Lent." There's a beat, then laughter, loud and genuine. The scholars at the lower tables exchange amused, wounded looks. The jester continues, moving from table to table, spinning observations into quicksilver wit. The knight who's fallen asleep upright, the lady whose hat could double as a siege tower, the servant desperately pretending not to exist. You can't help laughing quietly yourself. He's good, really good. Then he pauses before the king. "And your majesty," he says, lowering his voice, "may the Lord bless your marriage with peace, love, and as few cousins as possible." The hall freezes, a dangerous joke, given how tangled royal bloodlines can be. But the king bursts out laughing so loudly that his goblet sloshes wine onto the table. The tension evaporates into cheers and applause. You notice the queen smile, small, real, tired, the kind that says, "I needed that." The next act is softer. A storyteller, gray-haired and dignified, stepping forward with a carved staff. He begins a tale of courtly love, dragons, and impossible quests, the sort of story where the moral is both obvious and vaguely contradictory. His voice is slow, melodic, hypnotic, the kind that seeps into your bones. You find yourself drifting. The words weave around you like incense. For a moment, you forget where you are. You're no longer a guest in a crowded hall. You're standing beside a knight in moonlight, watching a tower glow on a distant hill. The crowd is utterly silent, spellbound. Even the dogs have gone still, ears twitching to the rhythm of the tale. When the storyteller finally bows, there's a pause, then thunderous applause. "Reward him," the king commands, tossing a small purse. The man catches it midair with the reflexes of someone who's had a lot of practice catching royal favor. You take a sip of your watered wine, feeling the warmth settle in your chest. The performances blur together after that. Dancers in swirling silks, musicians plucking rapid-fire melodies, a choir of children singing a hymn that echoes through the rafters. It's a sensory feast layered atop the physical one, beauty feeding beauty, until the air itself feels heavy with gold. Between acts, you overhear bits of conversation. Nobles whispering about politics disguised as compliments, servants gossiping about who flirted with whom, an elderly count explaining loudly that things were far simpler in the days of Charlemagne. You nod sympathetically, though you weren't around to confirm. The queen rises at one point to offer a toast, her voice calm, melodic, commanding. She speaks not just as a bride, but as a sovereign-to-be. May the bonds we've forged tonight endure longer than the candles that light our feast, she says, raising her cup. And may our laughter outlast our quarrels. It's simple but perfect. The applause feels almost reverent. The minstrels strike up a gentle tune again, a slow rhythm that's clearly meant for dancing. Couples begin to move toward the open floor, hesitant at first, then in growing waves of velvet and silk. The king extends his hand to the queen, and together they step into the first dance, their movements measured, symbolic, more ritual than rhythm. And you, sitting on the edge of it all, feel oddly content. This isn't your world too gilded, too rehearsed, but for one evening you've been folded into its warmth. A fringe fact to carry with you. Some medieval courts employed dance masters to choreograph even spontaneous movement, ensuring that royal gestures aligned with political messaging. Every spin, every bow, was a kind of diplomacy in motion. You suspect tonight's choreographer would faint if he saw what happens next. The moment the royal pair steps off the floor, the dance dissolves into chaos. Boots, skirts, laughter, the music quickens, and the line between grace and giddiness vanishes. A knight twirls a serving maid. A noblewoman drags her husband into a spin that nearly topples a jug of mead. The jester weaves between them all, mimicking their movements with exaggerated precision until the hall shakes with laughter. This laughter feels more honest than anything else tonight. It cuts through titles and duties and royal restraint, leaving behind nothing but warmth. You exhale. The night hums around you. The feasting may have ended hours ago, but the celebration has only just begun. The fire has burned down to a mellow red glow, but the hall refuses to sleep. You lean back, feeling the ache in your spine from too much sitting, too much laughter, too much history in one night. Around you, the energy has shifted. The raucous chaos of feasting and dancing now softens into that late evening hum where wine and warmth blur the edges of everything. The air smells of beeswax, roast fat, and the faint sweetness of spiced mead. You can almost taste the calm, but not for long. Because now begins one of the most delicate rituals of all, the presentation of gifts, a glittering performance of politics disguised as generosity. The steward, back in action and visibly haunted, calls names from a scroll so long it could double as a tablecloth. Each noble steps forward, bows deeply, and presents something symbolic: gold goblets, embroidered veils, carved reliquaries, illuminated books. It's mesmerizing and a little absurd. The gifts are not really for the bride and groom. They're for alliances, for favors yet to be asked, for messages that can't be written outright. A jeweled belt might mean loyalty, a silver mirror might whisper envy, and that awkwardly shaped candlestick, that's probably an inside joke from the Earl of Northshire. You, tucked along the benches, watch the procession unfold like a slow-moving tapestry. A bishop presents a book bound in crimson velvet, claiming it holds the blessings of 3 saints, though you suspect it also hides a stash of letters. The queen accepts it with serene politeness, her smile as unflinching as a carved statue. Here's your factual anchor. Royal wedding gifts were often inventories of diplomacy. One documented English wedding in the 15th century recorded over 250 distinct items, many of which reappeared in later diplomatic exchanges. Gifts were a kind of currency, an ongoing conversation of silver and silk. A murmur runs through the crowd as a lesser noble presents a miniature ship made of gold filigree, its sails encrusted with pearls. "For safe voyages between hearts," he declares dramatically. You snort quietly. The man clearly rehearsed that line. Still, the queen nods graciously, and the steward hurries to carry it away before anyone sneezes near it. But not every offering lands well. A nervous baron steps forward holding a small, shriveled fruit preserved in wax. From the Holy Land, he explains proudly, a symbol of divine fertility. The room pauses, a few coughs. Somewhere, the jester mutters, looks more like divine prune juice. The laughter that follows rescues the poor man, though the steward's expression could sour milk. Historians still argue whether these moments of gift-giving carried genuine sentiment or were merely mechanical gestures of feudal obligation. Was the queen truly touched by the golden chalice, or was she just calculating which duchy it came from? The truth probably lies somewhere between gratitude and grim endurance. By the time the 50th noble steps forward, you start to lose track. It's a river of precious metals and anxious smiles. But you notice something subtle in the queen's demeanor. Every gift receives the same careful attention, whether it's a gemstone or a handmade charm. That's not vanity, that's politics performed with grace. As the last names are read, the crowd exhales collectively. The queen finally sits back, her hands clasped, her shoulders relaxed. The king mutters something to her, you can't hear the words, but the tone is affectionate, almost teasing. For a moment, they seem less like monarchs and more like two people simply surviving a long day together. The musicians shift again, playing softer tunes now, lilting airs meant for listening, not dancing. Servants refill cups with lighter wine, trays of candied fruits circulate, and the guests begin the slow, graceful art of pretending to leave while actually staying another hour. You step outside for air. The courtyard has transformed, torches gutter in the breeze, and the night sky stretches above, clear and impossibly full of stars. The sound of laughter drifts through the open doors, mingling with the faint clatter of hooves as a few early departing carriages rattle away. The air out here tastes different, cleaner, cooler, edged with smoke and pine. You breathe it in like medicine. For the first time all night, you can hear your own heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the walls, an owl hoots, indifferent to royal celebrations. A cluster of servants huddle near the kitchens, whispering and giggling. You catch fragments, the jester's joke, the duchess's dress mishap, a rumor about the amount of wine missing from the cellars. There's joy in their exhaustion, the kind that only comes after surviving a monumental day. A curious little detail for you. Medieval banquets sometimes ended with guests taking home relics of the meal, a bone wrapped in silk, a spice-dusted loaf, even a spoon stamped with the royal crest. Think of it as an early party favor, though less Instagram-friendly and more likely to rot. Back inside, you notice the jester sitting on the steps near the dais, finally unmasked by fatigue. He's quiet now, bells still. A child, maybe one of the kitchen scullions, hands him a slice of leftover pie. He smiles, bows solemnly to his tiny admirer and takes it like communion. It's strangely touching. The queen notices too. Her gaze lingers on the jester for a moment, thoughtful. Then she turns to her ladies and whispers something that makes them all smile. Perhaps a command to ensure the performer gets a warm bed and breakfast tomorrow. Or perhaps just a shared recognition that even laughter deserves gratitude. You're pulled back to the present as a pair of trumpets sound, not the sharp ceremonial kind from earlier, but a softer flourish signaling the night's winding down. The herald announces that the royal couple will retire soon, but of course, the guests take this as an invitation to drink faster, not leave sooner. The steward makes another round, his ledger clutched like a holy relic. You wonder if he dreams of blank pages. At the far end of the hall, the musicians strike up a final melody, something ancient and slow, the kind of tune that feels like it's been wandering Europe for centuries. The melody drifts like smoke, carrying the weight of 100 forgotten weddings. You watch as the queen rises, the chatter fades. Her gown shimmers with each movement, silk, pearls, shadow. She bows her head slightly in gratitude, a gesture that ripples down the hall like wind over water. "You have honored us," she says softly, her voice steady despite the hour. "May joy and fortune follow each of you home." A simple line, but in that moment it sounds eternal. The crowd bows, murmuring blessings in return. You realize this is what all the spectacle was leading toward, not just food, music, or politics, but this fleeting harmony where everyone pretends, for one heartbeat, that the kingdom is united and well. The moment breaks as the king stands, offering his arm. The hall applauds politely. Somewhere, the jester claps with exaggerated reverence. The couple begins their slow procession toward the chapel doors, where priests wait with flickering candles to bless their union one final time before night claims them. You stay seated, watching the glow fade. The laughter softens, replaced by the rustle of silk and the murmurs of weary nobles gathering cloaks. The great feast has ended, but its echoes will linger in the gossip, the songs, the debts of gratitude sealed in gold. A servant yawns. The steward finally allows himself a small smile, the kind that says, "We did it, and nothing caught fire." You stretch your legs, feeling the ache of history settling into your bones. The feast is over, but somehow you're not ready for it to end. The music has softened to a distant hum, a few stragglers humming along as servants clear the wreckage of the night. You're still seated near the long table, once magnificent, now a battlefield of crumbs, melted wax, and overturned goblets. The heat of the fire presses against your back, but the air is already cooling. It feels like the castle is exhaling after holding its breath all day. Yet even as the crowd thins, a quiet anticipation lingers. The feast may be over, but the wedding night, the most symbolic act of all, has only just begun. This isn't the part they write ballads about, though. In medieval royal weddings, the consummation wasn't a private affair of romance, but a publicly verified duty. The political future of a kingdom depended on two people convincing an entire court that they were capable of producing heirs. You take another sip of wine and try not to imagine how deeply awkward this must be. A soft rustle draws your eye. Servants move purposefully now, carrying linens, torches, and bowls of scented water toward the queen's private chamber. The air smells faintly of rose oil and lavender, luxury distilled into ritual. Someone even sprinkles crushed herbs across the corridor, perhaps to bless the union, or perhaps just to mask the smell of medieval plumbing. One lady-in-waiting whispers to another, her tone both giddy and reverent, "They'll undress her soon." You realize this isn't gossip, it's protocol. Fact check for the evening. In high medieval courts, the royal couple was sometimes ceremonially put to bed before witnesses. Nobles, bishops, and relatives would escort the newlyweds to their chamber, bless the bed, and sometimes, brace yourself, watch them lie down before politely exiting. Think of it as the least relaxing honeymoon kickoff in human history. You follow the slow procession up a spiral staircase, each step lit by flickering torches. The corridors grow quieter. The laughter fades. You can hear the muffled heartbeat of the castle itself, the crackle of distant fires, the sigh of stone settling for the night. The queen walks ahead, flanked by her attendants. Her veil trails behind her like a river of silver, gathering candlelight as it goes. The king, a few steps ahead, looks more like a man heading into battle than into matrimony. His jaw is set, his shoulders straight. But every now and then his eyes flick back toward her, uncertain, reverent, maybe even nervous. When they reach the royal chamber, the doors open onto a scene of deliberate beauty. The bed dominates the room, a towering structure draped in crimson silk embroidered with gold thread. The sheets are white linen, the pillows stuffed with goose down, perfumed with orris root. Above the bed, a canopy bears the entwined crests of both families, stitched together in triumph. Around the room, candles burn low in tall iron sconces, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. A carved chest near the hearth holds the queen's wedding gown, folded like a relic. The air feels thick, not with heat, but with symbolism. Every detail whispers power, fertility, divine approval. The bishop steps forward, his voice steady as he blesses the bed. "May this union be fruitful and faithful," he intones, tracing the sign of the cross in the air. "May peace dwell where love begins." A few courtiers murmur, "Amen," though you're fairly certain at least one of them is thinking about the leftover pastries downstairs. The attendants help the queen remove her jewelry, each piece unclasped, kissed, and placed in a velvet-lined coffer. Her crown goes last. Without it, she looks younger, almost fragile, but also more real. You catch a flicker of emotion on her face, not fear exactly, but a kind of quiet gravity. She knows this night will be remembered in chronicles, whispered in courts, judged by people who will never know her name beyond the title queen consort. The ladies-in-waiting draw the bed curtains aside. The king approaches, hesitates, then takes her hand. Their fingers touch for the briefest second, a small human gesture swallowed by ceremony. Historians still argue whether these ritual beatings were truly witnessed consummations or simply symbolic acts meant to ensure legitimacy. Some records suggest that once the royal pair were seen lying together, the onlookers withdrew, leaving them to privacy. Others hint at more invasive observation, depending on how suspicious or desperate the dynasty was for heirs. You decide you've heard enough to be profoundly grateful for modern wedding customs. As the final prayers fade, the courtiers back away, bowing. The bishop sprinkles holy water over the bed, muttering a final benediction. The door closes softly, leaving only two silhouettes behind the curtain. Outside in the corridor, servants begin their quiet cleanup. Shoes clatter on stone, whispering feet carry away empty pitchers. The tension seeps out of the air. Somewhere down below, the last of the musicians pack away their lutes. A stable boy snores in a pile of hay. The castle, for the first time all day, begins to sleep. You linger near a window, drawn to the cool night air. The moonlight spills across the courtyard, silvering the cobblestones and catching in the dew that has settled on the grass. The torches have burned low, their smoke trailing upward like sighs. It's easy to imagine that the whole kingdom sleeps in rhythm with this castle, farmers dreaming of better harvests, soldiers dozing at watch posts, monks mumbling prayers in candlelight. Tonight, for once, everything feels still. A strange, almost tender thought crosses your mind. All this, the feasting, the ceremony, the absurdly expensive swans, exists for the sake of continuity. The royal marriage isn't just two people joining hands. It's a hinge upon which the entire future turns. You wonder if the queen knows that, lying behind those heavy curtains. You wonder if she's allowed to think of herself as a person, or only as a vessel for destiny. A gust of wind rattles the window pane, breaking your reverie. You pull your cloak tighter and watch the moon climb higher. Somewhere below, a door creaks open, and a cat slips silently across the courtyard, its shadow flickering between patches of light. In that moment, the grandeur of the day seems to dissolve into something beautifully ordinary. The castle isn't just a palace. It's a home full of noises, smells, and tired people. The queen isn't just a symbol. She's someone trying to rest after the longest day of her life. You smile to yourself. Even history, it turns out, snores eventually. By dawn, the castle feels entirely different. The revelry has drained away, leaving only the quiet, comfortable disarray of the morning after. The halls smell faintly of wood smoke, rosewater, and bread baking in the distant kitchens. Servants glide about in soft-soled shoes, whispering as they collect goblets and candle stubs, careful not to disturb the sleeping nobility. The great hall, scene of so much noise only hours ago, now lies in a hush so deep that even a dropped spoon sounds like a bell. You wander through the fatting glow of the torches, past empty trestle tables and wilted garlands. A single goblet of wine has been left on the high table beside a half-eaten fig. Perhaps the queen placed it there. Perhaps the king. Either way, it feels like a small, human trace amid the relics of ceremony. A faint streak of light seeps through the arrow-slit windows, painting long pale stripes across the floor. Outside, the courtyard is waking. Grooms are brushing horses. A boy yawns as he draws water from the well. The sky is the color of pewter and milk, the kind of light that makes even stone look soft. The queen's chamber remains closed, but the gossip has already begun to ripple quietly through the corridors. Not cruel gossip, just the curious hum of people who witnessed the height of pageantry and now must fill the silence that follows. A lady-in-waiting insists that the bishop himself confirmed the union with great satisfaction, though it's difficult to know whether that's a true account or a diplomatic flourish. You overhear a guard mutter that the king looked positively terrified when the door closed last night. Another claims the opposite, that he was beaming like a saint in a stained glass window. Everyone seems certain they saw something, but the truth, as always, remains behind the curtains. In a quieter corner of the castle, you find the queen's personal attendants preparing the morning ritual. A bronze mirror has been set out on a table beside a basin of warm water and a small jar of honey salve. The mirror, slightly warped, reflects the room with the dreamy distortion of a pond. A comb lies beside it, carved bone, delicate and worn. One maid hums softly as she mixes crushed herbs into a bowl, rosemary for clarity, chamomile for calm. It is the queen's morning wash, a simple but sacred act, for queens were expected to embody not only grace but divine order itself. You recall a passage from an old manual of manners. Let the queen appear each morning with serenity upon her face, for the people's joy begins in her countenance. In other words, no frowning before breakfast. The door opens with a gentle creak. The queen steps in quietly, wrapped in a pale linen robe. Her hair, unbound now, falls loose over her shoulders, catching the early light like threads of amber. She looks younger again, though there is something solemn in her eyes, an understanding, perhaps, that the rest of her life has already been set into motion. Her maid kneels, offering the bowl of fragrant water. The queen dips her fingers, presses them to her temples, and closes her eyes. It's an unremarkable moment, and yet oddly powerful. No music, no ceremony, no witnesses but a few sleepy attendants. Just a young woman washing her face after the most significant night of her life. Through the open shutters, the courtyard begins to fill with life. The chapel bell tolls once, twice. Doves flutter from the eaves. Somewhere beyond the walls, a farmer calls to his oxen. The ordinary world resumes. The queen sits before her mirror and studies her reflection. She seems to search for something, perhaps the difference between who she was yesterday and who she must be today. If there's any change at all, it's invisible to the rest of us. When she finally speaks, her voice is soft but steady. "Send word to the chapel," she says. "We'll give thanks before the morning meal." Her maid curtsies and hurries off, skirts brushing the rush-covered floor. The queen lingers a moment longer, then stands and fastens a silk girdle around her waist. From a nearby coffer, she takes a small brooch shaped like a lily, the symbol of purity and queenship. It glints faintly in the light. You realize that every action, however simple, is a kind of performance now. Even the way she ties her gown or braids her hair has meaning. She is both woman and emblem, private self and public symbol, all in the same heartbeat. Down in the great hall, preparations for the morning gift ceremony are already underway. This ancient custom marks the husband's formal granting of land, jewels, or privileges to his new wife, a gesture meant to secure her position and honor. Tables are being laid again, though this time with more restraint. Silver platters of fruit, fresh bread, and a jug of watered wine. The musicians tune their lutes in half-sleep, their notes drifting lazily through the air. When the queen enters, a murmur ripples through the room. The courtiers rise and bow. The king steps forward to greet her, looking slightly less regal than yesterday and far more human. His hair is disheveled, his expression cautious but gentle. He holds out a small chest, carved from oak and inlaid with ivory. "My gift," he says simply. The queen opens it. Inside lies a single polished ring of gold, plain but heavy, inscribed with words in Latin, Semper Una, always one. It's a modest gift by royal standards, but the court applauds anyway. The symbolism is what matters. A kingdom depends as much on appearances as on treaties. The couple take their seats at the high table once more, side by side this time. No speeches, no dramatic gestures, just the faint sound of spoons in bowls, the hum of conversation, the slow return to daily life. A new queen begins her reign not with a coronation, but with breakfast. As the hall fills with gentle clatter and laughter, you step back toward the window. Sunlight pours through the glass, glinting off flagons and goblets. Dust motes dance in the light like drifting gold. You breathe in the smell of bread, honey, and smoke. The feast, the ceremony, the spectacle, all of it fades into memory, leaving only the soft rhythm of morning in a medieval castle. It's strangely peaceful here, a good place to rest. Somewhere a bell rings again, clear, slow, steady. You close your eyes and listen. The sound folds the castle back into silence. And if you're very still, you can almost hear the heartbeat of history, soft, regular, and patient, as it drifts toward sleep once more. The castle exhales a long sigh as the day drifts onward. By mid-morning, the mist outside has burned away, revealing a landscape so ordinary it feels almost absurd after last night's splendor. A few farmers lead their carts along the muddy track toward the outer gate. The banners that once snapped with pride in the wind now hang limp and damp. You stand by a narrow window, watching life resume its unremarkable rhythm. Inside, the atmosphere is subdued but content. Servants whisper that the new queen smiled at the chapel that morning. They say the king even laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that startled his advisors. Historians still argue whether such early glimpses of affection were political theater or something tender breaking through the protocol. In truth, you suspect it doesn't matter. In this world, performance and sincerity have long since merged into one continuous act. You move through the corridors again, tracing the footsteps of the last few nights, but everything feels softer now, less glittering, more human. The same tapestries hang along the walls, but their woven knights and saints seem tired too, as if they've witnessed one too many royal unions. In the kitchens, steam curls from cauldrons of porridge and broth. The cooks, who last night oversaw a minor miracle of logistics, now shuffle about in a kind of trance. One yawns, another hums an off-key tune about a peddler and a goose. The smell of yeast, cinnamon, and ash clings to everything. A scullery maid, perhaps emboldened by fatigue, tells you she saw the queen earlier, as radiant as a candle flame, walking with the king in the herb garden. She insists the queen plucked a sprig of thyme and tucked it into his sleeve for luck. It's probably nonsense, but you can't help imagining it. The tiny, intimate moment hidden inside 1,000 public expectations. When you step out into the garden yourself, the air feels cooler, threaded with the scent of mint and marjoram. Bees drift lazily from bloom to bloom. The queen's footprints are still visible in the dew, delicate impressions leading toward a stone bench beneath an apple tree. You sit there for a while, watching a bird peck crumbs from the path. This bench, you're told, was built for another royal bride generations ago, an earlier queen whose story has mostly faded, though one embroidered pillow in the tower still bears her initials. The chroniclers barely mentioned her after the wedding. Perhaps her marriage was dull, or perhaps peaceful queens simply left fewer legends behind. Either way, she sits now among history's quieter echoes, her name stitched in silk, her life reduced to a rumor in the dust. You wonder if this new queen will meet the same fate, celebrated today, half remembered tomorrow. The medieval world was not kind to women who faded from spectacle. A queen's worth, at least in the eyes of her court, was measured not only by alliances and heirs, but by her ability to embody grace under scrutiny. She had to look serene while political storms raged around her. One mainstream historical fact: Many royal marriages in the Middle Ages were sealed not with passion but with parchment, treaties inked by clerks who cared more for borders than for hearts. A bride could be as young as 12, a groom twice her age. Yet on wedding day, poets still sang of eternal devotion. You'd almost admire the consistency of the delusion if it weren't so exhausting. There's a quirky tidbit, too, one the old accounts love to repeat. Some courts believed that a happy marriage required the couple to eat from the same loaf of bread baked with 7 blessed herbs. The idea was that the herbs, gathered at dawn by a virgin, would bind the couple's fates. Whether this worked is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether it was an authentic folk custom or just a chronicler's poetic invention. Either way, it adds a pleasant flavor to the myth. The Queen's herb garden here feels like a remnant of that world, half spiritual, half practical. The rosemary bushes hum with bees, the lavender sways like purple smoke, and you realize how often beauty was cultivated in service of belief. Every flower had a meaning, every scent a purpose. Sage for wisdom, marigold for fidelity, rose for grace. You crouch down, touch the soil, and it feels warm, alive with small, unseen effort. When you look up again, the castle walls seem softer in the sunlight, their stones glowing faintly gold. You hear faint laughter from a distant balcony, one of the Queen's ladies perhaps, or a musician idly plucking strings. Life has already begun to rearrange itself into routine. A small procession crosses the courtyard, scribes carrying rolls of parchment, a steward holding a ledger, a falconer with a restless bird on his glove. The hum of administration returns, steady as the ticking of an unseen clock. For all its glory, a royal wedding is just a pause in governance, a brief glittering interruption. Now documents must be signed, alliances confirmed, dower lands listed, accounts balanced. Even love, it seems, has a ledger. You follow the steward to the solar where the Queen now meets with her confessor. Through the half-open door, you catch fragments of conversation, her voice steady, polite, inquisitive. She asks about the duties of charity, about the foundation of a small hospital for travelers. He murmurs approval. This, too, is part of her role, to soften power with piety. As they speak, you notice a tapestry above the hearth depicting the wedding at Cana, where water turns miraculously into wine. It's a reminder that every feast, every blessing, carries the faint echo of miracle. Perhaps that's what last night was meant to symbolize, not just union, but transformation. You step back into the corridor, letting the sound of their voices fade behind you. A page runs past carrying a folded message sealed with wax. The seal bears the royal crest, a lion intertwined with a lily. You can almost feel history pressing forward, already tugging this couple toward their roles in it. Still, a trace of tenderness lingers in the air. You pass a window and glimpse the king below in the courtyard, tossing a crumb of bread to a stray dog. It's a tiny thing, but somehow more real than the crown itself. You smile a little sleepily. The pageantry has dimmed, leaving behind something quieter, like the lingering hum after a song ends. The feast was the performance. This, what remains, is the life. The wind picks up, stirring the pennants once more. Somewhere in the distance, the chapel bell chimes noon. And you can't help thinking that for all the politics and ceremony, this morning's light feels far more like a blessing than any bishop's words. By afternoon, the castle glows with that peculiar drowsy light that follows celebration. The sunlight falls at a lower angle, warm and hazy, gilding the rushes and banners that no one has yet taken down. You walk through it slowly, as though through the aftermath of a dream, the corridors faintly humming with echoes of last night's laughter. Somewhere, faint harp strings are being plucked not for ceremony now, but for comfort, the musician playing more for himself than any audience. The new queen sits in her private solar, a room awash with color and soft disarray. On one table rests a silver tray of candied fruits, half forgotten. On another, a stack of freshly penned letters bearing the royal seal. Light filters through narrow, stained glass, dappling the walls in jewel tones. She sits by the window, sewing in silence, the golden thread flashing in the sun with every movement of her hand. The king is elsewhere in council, perhaps, or with his falconers, but for the first time since the feast began, she is alone. You watch her for a while, the steady rhythm of needle and thread hypnotic in the hush. The air smells faintly of wax and rose oil. Outside, the gentle sounds of the courtyard drift up, the clatter of hooves, the distant laughter of children, the rhythmic creak of a well rope. For all the ceremony and grandeur, this is what queenship often looked like: quiet repetition, endless decorum, long hours of waiting in silk. Historians still argue whether queens found joy in such solitude or simply learned to inhabit it gracefully. You imagine the answer changes from one reign to the next. A soft knock breaks the stillness. Her steward enters with a scroll. "Letters from Aquitaine, your grace," he says, bowing. She gestures for him to place them beside her embroidery frame. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she asks, "And the musicians, have they eaten?" "Yes, Majesty, bread and cheese from the king's table." "Good," she murmurs, returning to her stitching. It's such a small exchange, and yet it reveals everything. A queen trained to think of propriety, hospitality, balance. Even after a night of pomp and exhaustion, she moves through duty with grace so practiced it might as well be instinct. The steward hesitates. "There's also a gift sent by the abbess of St. Ethelreda, a relic for your new household chapel." The queen nods, and he opens a small casket lined with velvet. Inside lies a fragment of bone, pale, delicate, almost luminous. "The finger of a blessed martyr," he explains reverently, "said to bring peace to marriages." You feel the air shift slightly. Even the queen pauses, uncertain whether to bow or laugh. It's a strange, almost grotesque token, and yet it fits perfectly in this world where faith and superstition intertwine. A mainstream fact: in the later Middle Ages, relics were not just holy objects but also political currency, exchanged between courts as tokens of goodwill. This one, in its own quiet way, is another kind of treaty. The queen traces a finger over the glass lid, thoughtful. "Place it in the chapel," she says softly, "and tell the abbess I am grateful." As the steward withdraws, you can't help smiling. Peace in marriage from a saint's finger. It's either a beautiful gesture or a very pointed joke from the abbess. Historians still debate whether such gifts were believed literally or simply tolerated as polite tradition. When the door closes, the queen sets down her needlework and walks to the window. From here, the world unfolds in slow, deliberate motion, the moat glimmering beneath the sun, the distant hills hazy with autumn heat. A pair of children play at nights with wooden sticks, their laughter echoing faintly. Somewhere near the stables, a groom sings a verse about a sailor and a swan. The queen rests her palm against the cool glass. For a moment, her reflection merges with the sky, her face haloed in shifting light. You realize that this, too, is part of her education. To be seen yet unknowable, graceful yet unreachable, a symbol as much as a person. Behind her, the half-eaten candied fruit catches your eye. The colors, crimson quince, golden pear, gleam like jewels. A small fly circles lazily above them. You almost hear her mother's voice in your head, warning that flies find even the finest honey. It's the sort of proverb that must have been whispered in royal nurseries for generations. Then the door opens again, this time without ceremony. One of the queen's younger attendants slips in, flushed from running. "Your Grace," she whispers, "the king requests your presence in the garden." The queen's expression softens. She smooths her gown, adjusts her sleeves, and rises. The motion is so fluid it seems choreographed, as though even affection must be performed with elegance. You follow as she walks through the corridor, her slippers barely whispering against the rushes. Sunlight pours through the tall windows, painting her silhouette in gold. Outside, the garden hums with bees and warmth. The king stands beneath a linden tree, his cloak cast aside, a falcon perched on his arm. He looks younger here, less burdened by the crown. When he sees her, his face brightens in a way that feels unpracticed. "Come," he says, "she's restless." The queen steps closer and he extends his arm so she can stroke the bird's feathers. The falcon blinks, utterly unimpressed by royal company. "She'll fly soon," the king murmurs. "I thought you might wish to see it." The queen smiles faintly. "Does she always return?" "Usually," he says, "but not always." You watch as he lifts his arm, releasing the bird into the blue. The falcon arcs upward, wings flashing in the light, a streak of motion against the stillness of the sky. For a few seconds, both of them watch in silence, their faces tilted upward, their forms outlined by the late afternoon sun. And there it is, a moment unscripted, fleeting but startlingly real. No audience, no ambassadors, no choirs. Just two young monarchs and a falcon's shadow crossing the grass. Historians still argue whether love truly existed in arranged marriages, or whether it merely grew like ivy on a wall, slowly, inevitably, but never quite by design. Standing here, though, you think maybe it didn't matter. The Middle Ages were full of people doing their best within impossible frameworks. A smile, a gesture, even a shared silence, these were victories in their own right. The falcon circles once, twice, then dives, returning neatly to the king's glove. He laughs, a sound that startles the nearby courtiers, as if laughter itself were a breach of etiquette. The queen laughs too, softer but clear. And just like that, the spell breaks. The attendants bow, the falconer reclaims his bird, and the king and queen walk back toward the castle. Yet the air remains lighter, touched with something that feels almost hopeful. You linger a while longer beneath the linden tree, listening to the faint rustle of leaves. The scent of grass and sunlight fills the air. Somewhere, the distant bells of the town toll for vespers, their notes drifting across the fields like a benediction. And for the first time, the castle doesn't feel like a monument to formality. It feels like a home learning how to breathe again. Evening slides slowly over the castle, soft as silk. The courtyard glows in the last amber wash of sunlight, the kind that makes the moat shimmer and the swans look as if they've been gilded by accident. You find yourself lingering by a window again, the glass warm to the touch, the air fragrant with cooling stone and thyme. The queen has changed gowns, this time a softer shade, something more practical though still threaded with gold. The heavy coronet is gone, replaced by a narrow circlet of pearls. She moves through the great hall with that same serene precision, offering quiet words to those she passes. A nobleman bows, a lady-in-waiting curtsies, a scribe nearly drops his parchment in surprise when she asks about his family. It's strange how quickly majesty becomes routine. By now, the long day of after-celebration has turned into the quiet rhythm of evening duties. A clerk reads aloud a letter from a distant cousin congratulating the couple and, of course, suggesting a trade alliance should circumstances permit. The king listens, nods, and mutters something about circumstances rarely permitting anything. The queen smiles, not quite hiding her amusement. You sense that in private they might even be witty together. Dinner is smaller tonight. No feasts, no heralds, no juggling monks. Just the royal couple, a few advisors, and a modest spread of roasted fowl, peas, and a surprisingly ambitious pear tart. The conversation flows gently, and without the strain of public scrutiny. The queen, to your quiet delight, actually eats, an act that in the previous night's ceremony was practically a political statement. A mainstream historical fact slips to mind. Medieval queens were often expected to dine with grace but not hunger. A delicate phrase meaning they were supposed to appear nourished, yet never humanly hungry. Chronicles from the 14th and 15th centuries describe entire etiquette manuals devoted to how a lady should break bread, never tearing, always cutting, and never finishing her portion entirely. Somewhere you imagine a medieval tutor wagging a finger at a bewildered child bride. Remember, dear, leave a bite for virtue. The queen, perhaps intentionally, ignores that rule tonight. She finishes her pear tart completely. You can almost hear the scandalized ghost of a royal etiquette teacher gasping in the corner. There's laughter at the table, gentle and genuine. The steward, less formal now, tells a story about how the kitchen cat stole a capon right from under a cook's nose this morning. The king chuckles, and even the usually stone-faced guards allow themselves a smile. It feels like something has shifted, a loosening of the castle's stiff spine. The feast has ended, the treaties are written, and for the first time the people who inhabit these roles seem to be simply living. After dinner, torches are lit in the corridors, their light flickering across the frescoed walls. You follow the queen as she walks slowly toward the chapel. Her train whispers over the floor. A handful of attendants trail behind her, carrying small candles. The hush deepens with every step. Inside, the chapel glows with a golden dusk. Beeswax candles flicker before the altar, and the relic, the saint's finger, that faintly unsettling gift from the abbess, rests in a crystal case beside a small bouquet of herbs. The queen kneels before it, her face illuminated by the trembling light. She prays softly, her words too quiet to hear, but her expression is peaceful. You stand back, letting the echoes of the room swallow you whole. There's something profoundly human about the way her hands clasp and unclasp, about the occasional pause when she seems unsure what to say next. Historians still argue whether medieval queens were truly devout or simply bound by duty to appear so. But watching her now, you suspect the question misses the point. Faith in this world isn't always belief, it's rhythm, habit, the daily choreography of hope. When she rises, the chapel bell sounds for Compline, the final prayer before sleep. The note hangs in the air like incense. Outside, the castle is already dimming into shadow. You follow her through the courtyard, where a few late torches burn like small suns. The air carries the faint scent of damp grass and crushed rose petals. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear the soft clatter of pots being scrubbed, the quiet heartbeat of domestic life continuing just beyond the glow of ceremony. As she crosses the courtyard, she pauses beside the well. Her reflection shivers in the water. For a moment, she just looks down at herself, at the pale ring of sky, at the tiny candle of the moon beginning to appear. You can almost hear her thoughts. Who was I before the crown? Will anyone remember me when the songs end? You think of all the queens who came before her, each one a flicker in the long corridor of history. Some remembered for beauty, others for tragedy, a few for their fierce intelligence, and most for nothing at all beyond the day of their wedding. A quirky historical tidbit drifts up from some dusty corner of your memory. In certain medieval courts, newly crowned queens were expected to sleep that first week with a small parchment charm pinned to their pillow, inscribed with verses from the Song of Solomon. Supposedly, it brought fertility and calm dreams. Whether it worked or merely resulted in a lot of uncomfortable nights, historians still debate. The queen, thankfully, has no parchment pin tonight. When she reaches her chamber, her maids move quietly around her, loosening the laces of her gown, brushing her hair, extinguishing the candles one by one. The light fades, leaving only the faint glow from the hearth. You stay in the doorway, the warmth of the fire touching your face. The air smells faintly of lavender and beeswax. She sits before the hearth for a long time, the fire painting gold on her cheeks. Every now and then, her gaze drifts upward toward the canopy, where faint shadows of the flames dance like ghosts. There is no music now, no noise, only the steady rhythm of her breathing, and somewhere beyond the wall, the quiet murmur of guards changing watch. You realize that this silence, is the truest ending to the feast. Not the blessings or the banquets, not the ceremonies or the scrolls, but this single, unguarded moment of stillness after the storm of spectacle. She looks up once more, as if sensing your presence, then smiles faintly, just enough to suggest peace or maybe acceptance. Outside, the last bell of the night tolls. It's soft, distant, and deeply comforting. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in time with its echo. Tomorrow, the chronicles will begin writing about Her Majesty's fruitful reign. But tonight, in this quiet chamber, she's simply a woman at the edge of her own story, tired, beautiful and finally at rest. The castle sighs again, settling into its bones. Somewhere the swans drift back toward the center of the moat, white against the dark water. And the night folds gently around them all. Dawn comes softly, a thin gray light creeping through the shutters before the bells begin. The castle wakes slowly, first the scullery maids, then the kitchen fires, then the measured tread of guards switching posts. Somewhere down in the stables, a horse stamps its hoof against the flagstones, impatient for morning. The queen's chamber remains hushed. Curtains stir gently in the cool air. The hearth has gone to ash. On the table beside her bed lies the comb from the night before, a few loose strands of pale hair caught between its teeth. There's something tender in that sight, proof that even queens, whose portraits show only perfection, shed traces of themselves like anyone else. You half expect the morning to bring pageantry again, more visitors, more processions, but today feels different. This is the quiet aftermath, the day when the banners are folded and the trumpets put away. The king has already gone to the council chamber, where matters of grain tax and troop placement await him. The queen, for the first time in many days, is left to simply be. Her maid opens the shutters. Pale light spills across the bed, touching the embroidery of the coverlet, tiny gold vines twisting through scarlet silk. She sits up slowly, blinking at the brightness. Her face is bare, unpainted, and somehow younger. In this stillness, you see what the chronicles never bother to mention, that beneath the gold and ceremony, queens had mornings like everyone else. They yawned, they stretched, they hesitated before stepping into cold slippers. The past, when you look closely, is full of such ordinary moments, quiet rebellions against the myth of perfection. A faint knock at the door. It's her lady-in-waiting, carrying a tray of watered wine, honeyed bread, and a small bowl of berries. The queen thanks her softly. They speak in low voices about nothing of consequence: the weather, a stain on the hem of the coronation gown, the likelihood of rain delaying the hunt. But in the gentleness of their conversation lies something precious, the sound of two women who, for a few minutes, can forget the performance of royalty. After breakfast, she walks through the garden. Dew beads the grass, roses hang heavy with scent. The queen pauses by the fountain where doves drink. The water ripples as one bird hops in, scattering droplets like tiny pearls. For a moment, she smiles at it, a small, private expression that would never survive in an official portrait. She plucks a single blossom and studies it. In medieval courts, flowers were rarely innocent things. They carried coded meanings: fidelity, modesty, secrecy, passion. This one white rose edged in pink might symbolize the balance of purity and love. Or perhaps it means nothing at all, merely beauty for its own sake. You recall that in 15th century manuscripts, queens were often painted holding flowers, their faces serene, their hands impossibly delicate. The blossoms were never wilted, never imperfect. But here in her fingers, the petals already bruise under morning light. Real beauty, it seems, fades faster than art ever admits. She wanders to the edge of the orchard, where the castle wall rises behind a row of apple trees. Beyond it, faint and far, the village stirs, the smoke of cook fires, the lowing of cattle, the bark of a dog. Those sounds reach her like echoes of another life, one that exists just beyond her reach. It is said that queens in the Middle Ages were taught to speak softly, to keep their eyes lowered, to let others decide what stories would be told about them. But as she stands there, the wind tugging gently at her veil, you sense a quiet defiance. She may not speak her story aloud, but she knows it, and that perhaps is enough. A monk passes through the gate, carrying a basket of herbs for the apothecary. He bows deeply. She blesses him in return, the gesture automatic but kind. When he looks up, there's a flicker of surprise in his face, perhaps at her youth, or at the absence of jewels, or simply at the fact that queens, too, walk among flowers. The hours pass in their unhurried rhythm. She writes a letter, to whom you're not certain. The quill scratches softly, and every few lines she pauses as though weighing her thoughts. Maybe it's to her mother, describing the ceremony and the endless compliments. Or perhaps to a childhood friend, confessing that the crown feels heavier than she'd imagined. The ink dries in delicate strokes, each word a seed of history that might never sprout. Later, a minstrel plays in the great hall, soft enough that his song barely carries beyond the archways. The melody is slow, wistful, a tune about a bride who became a bird to escape her golden cage. The queen listens from a balcony above, her chin resting on her hand. You wonder if she recognizes herself in the story, or if she's simply enjoying the music. By evening, the air grows cool again. Candles bloom across the hall, servants move like shadows, lighting each one. Supper is light, a bowl of broth, a few slices of bread, a small dish of sugared almonds. The king joins her briefly, weary but affectionate. Their conversation drifts between politics and laughter. He tells her the council argued for an hour about who should pay for the repairs to the North Tower. She replies that she could have solved it in 10 minutes with common sense and less parchment. He grins. It's a small thing, this ease between them, but it feels like the beginning of something gentler than duty. When the queen retires again to her chamber, the fire is already burning. She sits by it, unwinding her braids, and hums a tune you've never heard before, something slow and unpolished, perhaps a lullaby from her childhood. The melody drifts through the room like smoke. You find yourself thinking of all the queens whose lives unfolded behind similar curtains, their names reduced to footnotes, their days stitched together by ritual and restraint. Yet in moments like this, in song, in stillness, they claimed small pieces of freedom. The light fades. The castle settles once more into silence. Beyond the walls, the world turns as it always has. Somewhere out there, in another century, another storyteller will try to imagine this same scene. They'll wonder what she looked like, what she thought, whether she was happy. And maybe, if they listen closely, they'll hear the same quiet truth that fills this chamber now. That beauty, for all its ceremony, was never the crown itself, but the calm that followed it. The queen leans back, eyes half closed, the golden crown resting on the table beside her. And at last she sleeps.